Shelter worker ignores crying dog's pleas. Then vet's shocking discovery changes everything. Sarah Martinez pushed through another exhausting day at the Oak Ridge Animal Shelter, her shoulders heavy with the weight of too many responsibilities and too few resources. The municipal shelter in their small Connecticut town was perpetually understaffed and overcrowded, a problem that had only worsened since the economic downturn. As the lead shelter coordinator, she'd grown accustomed to making difficult decisions, but nothing could have prepared her for the challenge that awaited her that rainy October morning. The incessant barking from Kennel B7 had been grating on her nerves for days. Its occupant, a scruffy-looking German Shepherd mix, had arrived the previous week after being found wandering near the interstate. The dog, listed simply as John Doe number 247 in their system, hadn't stopped crying since his arrival. While all newly arrived strays showed signs of stress, this one's behavior seemed different, almost desperate. "He's at it again," Monica, the young weekend volunteer, said as she passed by with a stack of food bowls. "Maybe he's in pain?" Sarah shook her head, consulting the intake form on her clipboard. Dr. Reynolds checked him out when he arrived. Basic health exam was normal, no visible injuries, no signs of illness. Just another abandoned dog with anxiety issues. She tried to keep the frustration out of her voice, but it slipped through anyway. After 15 years in animal welfare, she'd learned to maintain professional distance. It was the only way to survive in this field. The shepherd mix threw himself against the kennel door, his howls taking on an almost human quality of desperation. Sarah walked past, deliberately averting her eyes. They were already at 150% capacity, with 3 dogs to every kennel meant for one. She had 27 urgent emails to answer, 2 adoption interviews to conduct, and a stack of euthanasia decisions waiting on her desk. She couldn't afford to get emotionally invested in every difficult case, but something seems really wrong with him. Monica persisted, her young face creased with concern. At 19, she still hadn't developed the emotional calluses necessary for shelter work. "He's not eating, barely sleeping. He just cries and stares at the door like he's waiting for someone." "They're all waiting for someone," Sarah replied, perhaps more sharply than intended. "That's the nature of shelter dogs. Now, please finish the morning feeding rounds. We've got that school group touring in an hour." But as Sarah walked away, the dog's cries seemed to follow her down the corridor, burrowing into her consciousness like a splinter she couldn't quite shake loose. There was something about his voice, not just distress, but a focused intensity she'd rarely encountered before. She pushed the thought away and focused on her mounting tasks. The next few days followed a similar pattern. The shepherd mix, whom the staff had started calling Crying Charlie, became increasingly agitated. He refused most food and grew noticeably thinner, his ribs beginning to show through his dull coat. Sarah authorized additional medical checks, but they revealed nothing obvious. His blood work came back normal, and x-rays showed no hidden injuries. "I don't know what to tell you," Dr. Reynolds said, reviewing the results. "Physically, he's okay, underweight now, but that's from not eating. Whatever's wrong with him is either behavioral or something we're missing." Sarah nodded, adding Charlie's file to her growing difficult cases pile. With their limited resources, they couldn't justify keeping a seemingly healthy but unadoptable dog indefinitely. The shelter's euthanasia review board would meet next week, and she knew Charlie's case would come up for discussion. It was Monica who finally broke through Sarah's professional facade. The young volunteer cornered her one evening as she was preparing to leave, her eyes red from crying. "Please," Monica begged, "just spend 5 minutes with him. Really look at him. There's something we're not seeing." Sarah started to refuse, but the raw emotion in Monica's voice gave her pause. She thought about all the times in her career when she'd ignored her instincts in favor of procedure, of efficiency, of emotional self-preservation. Sometimes those decisions haunted her late at night, when she couldn't sleep wondering about the animals she might have saved if she'd just tried a little harder. 5 minutes, she finally agreed. "That's all." They walked to Charlie's kennel together. The dog was huddled in the corner, his posture defeated but his eyes alert. When he saw them, he rushed to the door, pressing his body against it with desperate intensity. "Watch his eyes," Monica said softly. "He's not just looking at us. He's trying to tell us something." Sarah knelt down, really studying the dog for the first time since his arrival. His brown eyes locked onto hers with an intelligence that made her breath catch. There was something there. Not just pain or fear, but a focused urgency she'd never seen before. "Okay," she said slowly. "Maybe you're right. Maybe we're missing something." She stood up, decision made. "Call Dr. Reynolds. Tell her we need a full diagnostic workup. Everything she can think of. Blood chemistry, hormone levels, the works. I'll authorize the expense." The comprehensive tests took several days to complete. In the meantime, Sarah found herself spending more time with Charlie. She noticed how he perked up whenever the shelter's front door opened, how his attention seemed focused on something beyond the kennel walls. His cries had taken on a different meaning to her now. Less annoying, more mysterious. When Dr. Reynolds called her into the clinic area 4 days later, her expression was unlike anything Sarah had seen in their 10 years working together. "You need to see this," the vet said, putting up a series of x-rays on the light board. "We almost missed it because it's so unusual. Look here." She pointed to a tiny dark spot near Charlie's shoulder blade. Sarah squinted at the image. "What am I looking at?" "A microchip," Dr. Reynolds replied. "But not just any microchip. This is military grade, the kind they use for service dogs in special operations. I've only seen one like it in my entire career." Sarah felt her heart rate quicken. "Can you read it?" "That's the thing, it's encrypted. But I have a colleague who works with military working dogs. He's making some calls." The next 24 hours passed in a blur of phone calls and emails. Sarah barely left the shelter, catching a few hours of sleep on the break room couch. When the final call came, it was from a colonel at Fort Bragg. Charlie's real name was Atlas. He was a highly trained military working dog who had been partnered with Army Ranger Staff Sergeant David Mitchell. 3 months earlier, their unit had been involved in a training exercise in upstate New York, when Atlas had become separated from the group during a severe storm. Despite an extensive search, they'd been unable to locate him. "Staff Sergeant Mitchell has been devastated," the colonel explained. "Atlas isn't just his partner. They've been through 2 deployments together. The dog saved his life in Afghanistan, warning him about an IED that everyone else had missed. Mitchell's been searching for him every weekend since he disappeared." Sarah looked at the photo they'd sent over. Atlas in his working vest, standing proudly beside a young Asian American soldier with kind eyes and a serious expression. "He's been trying to tell us all along," she whispered. "He was trying to get back to his person." The reunion was arranged for the following morning. Sarah arrived early, feeling a mixture of excitement and guilt. How many other animals had she dismissed over the years? How many signs had she missed because she was too busy, too tired, too afraid to look closer? When Staff Sergeant Mitchell walked through the shelter doors, Atlas's crying transformed into a sound of pure joy. The dog's entire body vibrated with happiness as Mitchell rushed to the kennel, falling to his knees in front of it. The moment the door opened, Atlas launched himself into his partner's arms, licking his face while Mitchell buried his face in the dog's fur, both of them trembling with emotion. "I never stopped looking for you," Mitchell whispered, his voice thick with tears. "I knew you were trying to find your way back to me." The story made national news. Local media outlets picked it up first, then larger networks. Soon, Sarah found herself being interviewed about the miracle military dog, who had traveled over 200 miles trying to reunite with his handler. The publicity brought unexpected benefits. Donations poured in, allowing the shelter to upgrade their medical equipment and hire additional staff. But the real change was more personal. Sarah began implementing new protocols at the shelter. Every animal would receive more comprehensive initial evaluations. Staff members were encouraged to report any unusual behaviors, no matter how small. Most importantly, she started trusting her instincts again, remembering that behind every kennel card and intake form was an individual with their own story to tell. 6 months later, Sarah sat in her office, Reviewing the shelter's latest statistics, their save rate had increased by 30%. The additional funding had allowed them to start a behavioral rehabilitation program for difficult cases. On her desk sat a framed photo of Atlas and Staff Sergeant Mitchell, taken at their reunion. She kept it there as a reminder of what could happen when you looked past the surface and really listened to what an animal was trying to tell you. A knock at her door interrupted her thoughts. Monica stood there, holding a tablet with their security camera feed displayed on the screen. "Sarah, you need to see this," she said, echoing Dr. Reynolds' words from that pivotal day. "The new dog in C12. There's something different about the way he's acting." Sarah stood up, grabbing her clipboard. "Show me," she said, following the young volunteer down the corridor. As they walked, she glanced at Atlas's photo one more time, remembering the lesson he'd taught her about hope, persistence, and the incredible bonds between humans and animals. The story of Atlas and Staff Sergeant Mitchell became something of a legend at Oak Ridge Animal Shelter. New volunteers heard it during their orientation, a reminder that every animal deserves not just compassion, but careful attention to their individual needs and behaviors. Sarah had the security footage from the reunion preserved, and sometimes on particularly difficult days, she would watch it again, drawing strength from the memory of that joyful moment. The incident sparked a wider conversation in the animal welfare community about the importance of comprehensive behavioral assessment and the need for better resources in municipal shelters. Sarah was invited to speak at conferences, sharing the story and the lessons learned from it. She always ended her presentations with the same message: sometimes the animals we think are the most difficult are actually the ones trying hardest to tell us something important. Our job isn't just to care for them, it's to listen to them. Staff Sergeant Mitchell and Atlas became regular visitors to the shelter. Mitchell, moved by his experience, started a non-profit organization dedicated to helping shelters identify and reunite lost military and service dogs with their handlers. He worked with technology companies to develop better tracking systems and with veterinary schools to train staff in identifying specialized microchips. Atlas, now retired from military service, became a therapy dog, working with veterans struggling with PTSD. His gentle presence and incredible story of loyalty helped countless former service members find hope in their own healing journeys. Mitchell often remarked that Atlas's temporary loss had led to a greater purpose, helping other veterans find their way back home, just as Atlas had found his way back to him. As for Monica, the experience confirmed her calling. She enrolled in veterinary school, determined to specialize in shelter medicine and behavioral health. During her breaks, she continued volunteering at Oak Ridge, bringing fresh enthusiasm and new knowledge to share with the staff. The shelter itself underwent a transformation. With the increased funding and attention, they were able to implement more innovative programs. They started a foster network specifically for behaviorally challenged dogs, giving them time to decompress and show their true personalities outside the stressful shelter environment. They developed partnerships with professional trainers and behaviorists who donated their time to work with difficult cases. 1 year after Atlas's reunion, Sarah stood in the shelter's newly renovated medical suite, watching Dr. Reynolds examine a recently arrived stray. The dog, a mixed breed with soulful eyes, had been showing some unusual behaviors that might once have been dismissed as simple anxiety. "What do you think?" Sarah asked, remembering another examination room. Another dog, another mystery to solve. Dr. Reynolds smiled, understanding the weight of the question. "We'll run every test we can think of," she replied. "After Atlas, we know better than to take anything for granted." Sarah nodded, reaching down to scratch behind the dog's ears. "Every animal has a story," she said softly. "Sometimes we just need to learn how to read between the lines to understand it." As she walked back to her office, passing the kennels where dozens of animals waited for their own happy endings, Sarah felt a profound sense of purpose. Atlas's story had changed not just her approach to shelter work, but her entire worldview. It had reminded her that sometimes the most important things in life couldn't be found in procedures and protocols. They had to be discovered through patience, compassion, and the willingness to look deeper. The crying dog who had once been such an annoyance had become the catalyst for positive change. touching countless lives in ways no one could have predicted. His journey home had opened doors and hearts, creating ripples of compassion that continued to spread outward, changing the lives of both animals and humans in their community. Sarah picked up a new intake form, ready to begin another day of solving mysteries and saving lives. Outside her window, she could see Monica working with a group of new volunteers, sharing Atlas's story as they toured the facility. The young woman's eyes still shone with the same passion that had pushed Sarah to look closer at the crying dog in Kennel B7, proving that sometimes the most important lessons come from those who haven't yet learned to guard their hearts. In the years that followed, whenever Sarah heard of a particularly challenging case or felt tempted to make quick judgments, she would remember the sound of Atlas's cries, not as an annoyance, but as a reminder that every animal in her care might be carrying a story just waiting to be discovered. It was a lesson that had transformed not just her career, but her entire approach to life. Sometimes the most precious things are found not in what we can immediately see or understand, but in the mysteries we take the time to unravel. And somewhere across town, a German Shepherd mix named Atlas lay contentedly at the feet of his beloved handler, their bond stronger for having been tested by separation and restored by the persistence of hope and the power of human compassion. Their story had become more than just a happy ending. It had become a beginning, inspiring countless others to look deeper, listen harder, and never give up on the animals who needed them most.